Доброго ранку всім, шановні.
Good morning, everyone, dear ladies and gentlemen. Greetings at Press Center of UCMC. And today, the topic of today's discussion, 30 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall, historic estimates and looking to the future. Speakers are Iryna Bekeshkina, director of the Ilko Kucheriv Democratic Initiative Foundation, senior researcher at the Institute of Sociology, NAS of Ukraine, Oleg Rybachuk, head of NaUKMA, Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine on issues of European Integration 2005, Solodky Sergiy, First Deputy Director of the New Europe Center, expert in foreign policy, international relations and security. Volodymyr Ogryzko will join us soon. Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine 2007-2009, Andreas Umland, Senior Fellow at the Euro-Atlantic Institute Collaboration, Associate Professor of Political Science, NaUKMA, Mikhailo Pashkov, Director of Foreign Policy Programs at the Razumkov Center, and Sergiy Shapovalov, Analyst of the Ilko Kucheriv Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Welcome. Good afternoon. We decided to hold this round table a little bit earlier than the date in order to remind to our journalists that on the 9th of November we will have a very important European event that is marked in nearly all European capitals. 30 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and tomorrow I will go to Bratislava and we will have an assembly there. And Ukraine will be discussed there, and I will represent Ukraine at the meeting. And for Ukraine, it is really important if we consider ourselves as Europe. So European history is also history of Ukraine. And these events resulted not only in the fall of the Berlin Wall, but also in the crash of USSR and crash of its influence on Europe. And today we gather here to discuss about the consequences of this event for Europe and for Ukraine, and what will be the future of Ukraine and what will be the prospects for Ukraine concerning European integration. We are supported, and this is logical, Public Council at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. Also, we were supported by organization Engage, financed by USAID, and it is carried out by PACT in Ukraine. It is evident that we hope that we should remind about this event, and we hope that this will start discussion among experts and in the media concerning whether Ukraine is ready to European integration and whether Europe is ready to help Ukraine in this process. So Ukraine should prove that we are Europeans, but also Europe should prove this as well. And the beginning is really interesting, and this is a long process, especially in our country. And now I would like to give the floor to Andreas Umland. He is senior fellow at the Euro-Atlantic Institute Collaboration, associate professor of political science and NaUKMA, and he is the citizen of Germany. He was for a long time in Leipzig, and I believe that he is able to tell us more about these events. Thank you very much. I will try to do this in Ukrainian. Maybe I will make some mistakes, but I will do this in Ukrainian. Yes, I am from Germany. I was in Leipzig, and I also was raised in Berlin, and this was really unexpected event. Eastern Germany, Democratic Republic of Germany, there were not many reforms in Eastern Bloc at that time. The most important events happened in Leipzig, not in Berlin. So the Berlin Wall was open, and this was a decision taken by some people in Eastern Germany, in the leadership. These were the leaders of Eastern Germany who did it, but this was not properly discussed. There was no preparation process of opening of the wall. When I heard about this, when I was in Leipzig and I got this information that the wall was open, I couldn't believe it. Not because I didn't want it, but because I believe that this is not logic to do this by the leadership of the Eastern Germany, because this will bring the end to this regime. And it happened so that there was a deep crisis, social, economic, and political crisis. And part of the leadership of Eastern Germany, they were neo-Stalinists. They were not reformers, like in other communist parties of Eastern Europe. There was an old generation, but the most influential decided to deal with this crisis there. And this was the cause of Eastern Germany. Some people believe that a month before, Gorbachev came to Berlin, and there is a theory that Gorbachev is behind all this. Globally speaking, he is a person who canceled Brezhnev doctrine and proposed another approach of the Soviet Union to Eastern European countries. Sometimes they joked about the doctrine of Sinatra. I did it my way. New policy, new foreign policy of Gorbachev, that you may do it your way, he said. You may do your own socialism in Czech Republic, or in Poland, or in East Germany. But he didn't have direct influence on this decision. As I know, even Russian embassy was not informed on this. So this was some sort of coincidence. This was a process that resulted in the fact that Eastern Germany, that was the most conservative before this, in the sense that this regime was less inclined to reforms. And after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Eastern Germany, in less than a year, was non-existent. There was unification on the 3rd of October 2019. It was unexpected, and we couldn't understand this clearly at that time. Now we understand that everything was okay and positive. There was no conflict. No one was shooting. And then I was thinking about what happened in Tiananmen Square, what happened in the square in Beijing, in Tiananmen Square in Beijing. I thought about those events at that time. And also it reminded me about Orange Revolution and Maidan Revolution of Dignity. So you cannot get all this information at the time. Yes, you may be free, you may go to barricades or to Berlin Wall, but before this you do not know this. Maybe you will be arrested there, or even you may be shot there. And it may happen like in North Korea, that exists still as a state. Only after these events we understood that this was a big moment. But at this moment you do not know what is going on and what it means. So maybe this is the end of my speech.
I think really maybe we shall have on 21st the roundtable discussion about Maidan revolution, and also nobody knew what would be in future. Yes, it is important to plan your actions, but it is not always possible. In this case, the consequences were very positive. We have asked our experts, and now our analyst he will report on our main conclusions upon the research among experts. Talking about the Eastern Germany, I think about one proverb about the marine Guinea pig, but this country in the Berlin crisis, I think everyone knows that his story. They often refer to this event when two militaries, one from the USA and one from the Eastern Germany, they used tanks, and there was an opposition because two countries really were in the state of Cold War, and it was a threat of the nuclear war. We now quote the original that these two tanks, the US tank and Soviet tanks, they were in opposition right near this wall. On each side of the wall there were tanks waiting for development of events. Now we discuss this event of the fall of the Berlin Wall because it marked the end of the Cold War. It was a symbolic iron wall, and this event marked the decrease of the USSR's impact in Europe and created prerequisites for its future collapse, and the lower geopolitical impact of the USSR meant also lower consequences for Ukraine. It meant the independence, which happened after 2 years after the fall of the German Wall. We know that in 2004 the European Union had had 9 countries acceded to it. They were former socialist countries. For Ukraine, the results were the independence of the country because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and indirectly the prerequisites were created for the further European integration of Ukraine. All these processes of democratization of the former Soviet countries in the Central and Eastern Europe, and now we are neighbors of the 4 countries which are members of the EU, and this also had an impact that after 30 years the Western countries are seen as strategic partners of independent Ukraine. As to the future European project, they see they are interconnected as a result of the fall of the Berlin Wall. The EU was extended. It was enabled by this event of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Whether Europe will become more integrated, whether the integration become deeper between the already existing members of the EU, or upon analysis of the current events such as Brexit, can we make a conclusion, can we reach a conclusion that the trend to the disintegration of the EU would proceed, whether Europe will be more integrated or disintegrated, what will be the trends? We are glad to say that there are unanimous thoughts that Ukraine in the mid-term perspective could be a member of the EU. How the EU will accept Ukraine, what steps Ukraine can do, and what steps the EU can do to press on Ukrainian government to accelerate reforms, so that there is conscious understanding that the actions which we do now, they will have the final result as enabling the membership of Ukraine in the EU. Almost all steps in Ukraine, almost all reforms in Ukraine, they are carried out under the pressure on the part of the European Union, because the Ukrainian government, it often lacks political will, and the role of civil society support by the EU was also mentioned by our experts. And this also helps, the EU helps us to be more consolidated. I would like to give the floor to Oleg Rybachuk, an ex-Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine on European integration in 2005. Thank you. The EU-Ukraine action plan we got from our predecessors. The EU did not wait for something special from Ukraine. The EU had no illusions about Ukraine. 2 months ago, I was back from Kalbild Club meeting. The conference is in the closed format, and the Scandinavian countries, Baltic countries, Visegrad countries, Russia, Georgia, Belarus, they were absent this year. They are the participants in this format of Carl Bildt meetings. Moldova was present this year. This is a top level summit where the EU MPs and the presidents of the countries are present, and we started discussions with the fall of the Berlin Wall anniversary. I summed up, I was the final during this meeting, and I was introduced as a representative of Ukraine, which gives hope to all of us. So, as Mr. Umland says, the happenings in Ukraine, they now look like the process in the Eastern Germany when there was no strong leader. This resembles the events in Ukraine. These days, for me, the fall of the Berlin Wall is the end of the system of international security. Maybe it can sound surprising, but before that, the world was understandable, easily understandable. One part of the world thought that the other part is bad guys, and vice versa. Then NATO was created to oppose the Stalin USSR and socialist camp and the Western camp. They were in the armament race. So it was the kind of golden period for Europe. The Western Germany was through the process of denazification in a very successful manner. Big countries such as the USSR, they had some Cold War with the USA and NATO. There were very small conflicts, but there was a balance in the world where the citizens could understand that the free world looked at us, at the empire of evil, and we looked at the Western world as on animals, as on imperialists. And when there is no Soviet Union, this means there is no enemy. So globally, the security system was threatened because everything looked surprising. A chancellor asked me those days that in Turin, the two parties won the elections. One were ultra-right party, and the second was the DDR Communist Party. So they were ultra-right and ultra-left parties who won the elections. And this is the situation as of today. For these 30 years, there were so many efforts put by the Western Germany into the Eastern Germany, and after the 30 years of these investments and these efforts, ultra-rights and ultra-leftists in an alliance will be in power in Germany these days. For us, the background of Steinmeier formula for the election in Donbass when the OSCE says let's hold democratic election in Donbass, while for 5 years the propaganda machinery worked not there, not less successful as German Nazi propaganda machine in the times of Hitler. I was very much impressed as well at the German diplomat. What should be in the brain, how brains should be washed up to have Communist Party in power after 30 years. I think that they were voters who grew up in the United Germany. So for our European partners, this is a huge challenge. For our highly esteemed European partner, this is the issue, the question for which they do have no answer. When we are pushed to hold the election in Donbass fast, Europe is now in a very difficult situation. There is a kind of similar electorate in Hungary, Italy, Poland. So talking about Ukraine, we are standing for the basic things which were the foundation for the European Union. That is why we are the hope for the old Europe, because they have now different trends dominating. Talking about the civil society, sometimes it is a society which serves the power, and from the opposite side they can see that it looks as if Ukraine again has a chance to go our path as it is declared in the Constitution of Ukraine. Our generation, which has grown up after the fall of the Berlin Wall, they have better mentality than the voters in the old Europe.
So we'll have a round table about Maidan, and I would like to remind you that my colleagues, young colleagues, they carried out a survey in Maidan concerning the methods of studying of values, and it was revealed that people who were in Maidan, they have more pro-European values than those people who live in Europe. So these people had even higher values than overall population of Ukraine, but they were the most European from all Europeans. Now Sergiy Solodky is given the floor, the New Europe Center representative. So maybe he will tell us about the New Europe, Old Europe, and whether we Europe at all. Thank you very much, Iryna, for this invitation and for this topic that you identified for discussion. It is important to analyze events in Ukraine and to study events in Ukraine in a broader context, because this is lacking in expert circles. I would like to start with the story about history when we marked 20 years of the fall of the Berlin Wall 10 years ago, in British press there was an article that cited Mikhail Gorbachev and Margaret Thatcher conversation, and she asked Gorbachev to prevent unification of Germany. This was done behind the scenes, and then we got information that there was negotiation with Mr. Mitterrand, that France and Great Britain, they were afraid that Germany, when it is united, it will once again create a threat for European continent. That's why they tried to avoid such a scenario, and they asked Mikhail Sergeyevich to think about this. When I got about this information, I referred to a Russian historian who immigrated to Great Britain, and I asked him whether he has other conversations
Чи в цих стенограмах йшлося про
and whether there is information about Ukraine. These were thousands of pages, and he found many conversations and these conversations with Great Britain, with the United States, about conversations about Germany. And all negotiations were about to prevent collapse of the Soviet Union and to prevent independence of Ukraine. Oleg Borisovich mentioned chicken speech. He mentioned Bush, and for example, Helmut Kohl met with Ukrainian leaders in July 1991, and Gorbachev said to him, Helmut, Ukrainian leaders are waiting for you, please speak to them. And Mr. Kohl said, maybe this conversation will take about 20 minutes, and I would like to give them our opinion that we should avoid any actions that would bring idea to the West that Soviet Union will collapse, and this will provide for creation of many new republics in its territory. Why I cite Helmut Kohl? Because recently, 2 years ago, before this conversation, Helmut Kohl, he faced the situation that Ukraine faced in 1991, when the world behind curtains tried to decide the fate of Germany. And there are a lot of transcripts and we studied, and I would like to speak about 3 lessons for Ukraine. We should have patience. We should be able to wait. Germany waited for 50 years to unite. In times of Cold War, there were attempts to unify Germany. Many attempts were different. Initiatives and plans were created, and they were started in Eastern Germany and in Moscow in order to have elections throughout Germany, in order that Germany developed as a communist socialist country, to broaden GDR to GFR, and in Bonn they didn't want these plans to be implemented, these plans created by Moscow. But Germany succeeded, they got united. Now it is market-oriented country and a member of NATO. Because there was an issue, many countries didn't want Germany to be the member of NATO. And lessons for Ukraine. We should not believe that our interests, our ideas, and our plans be supported by the world. German example of 1980 showed that not all the leaders supported GFR. Of course, later on, these leaders, they said that they were not right, and George Bush Sr. was in Kiev in 2004, and he explained why he acted like this in 1991 and what was his logic, because he was afraid of red dictatorship. Instead, one dictatorship to have 15 with nuclear powers. And for example, 450,000 Ukrainian troops and nuclear weapons, this may create threat to humanity. And before referendum in 1991, Bush called Gorbachev and asked when and how to recognize the independence of Ukraine. He wanted to understand the situation, and one of the conditions was to deprive Ukraine of its nuclear weapons. So 25 days for recognition of independence of Ukraine by America, this period was needed to do this. And also the story about Berlin Wall. We should not be too optimistic and naive, and we should not simplify processes too much in international politics. Unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe unfortunately, there was too much optimism of perception of those events. People believe that this process of democratization started, and the people believed that this process would continue. Now we see that this is not the case, that those countries they may pose a threat to security in the world. This is about Russia. Also, there are other negative trends. When instead of one Berlin Wall that was demolished, we get a lot of different walls. Sometimes they're invisible, sometimes they're visible. Here I would like to say about the wall to protect us from Russia, also in Romania against migrants, or Mediterranean region. Billions are invested in order to stop migration to Europe. Yesterday, there was a survey that the construction of walls becomes profitable business from this. EU spent about 1 billion for for building walls and fences in its borders, and globally it is 17.5 billion. This money is spent for construction of walls. These are sad lessons, but I believe that they are more realistic. I would like to go back to the first and second lesson for Ukraine. We should have patience in order to implement our goal, our aim. We should not hope too much. Of course, we should try to get support of our partners, but we should not think that everyone will support us. But we will succeed. And at the end, I would like to thank you for your expert survey about especially for the question what EU should do to support reforms in Ukraine. And I was pleased that experts, they believe that acceleration of reform is needed. And for this, we should acquire membership. And we remember first and second lesson. And I would like to say that our experts are optimistic. We held such surveys among Ukrainians in 2015, 2017. There was no proper dynamics, but I would like to remind to you that Ukrainians believe that most of all EU should pressure Ukrainian power. This is the first expectation. EU should stop giving money because the money is stolen by officials. And also the members should openly oppose Russia. So Ukrainians should listen to experts, and thank you for putting this question. We put this question into the survey that is now in the field, so we are interested what the opinion change. So I am interested when the word Russia will be voiced, because always we remember Russia and mention Russia, because any collisions, any problem, any prospects cannot be discussed if we do not analyze Russia and our responses to its actions. I would like to give the floor to the specialist, Mikhailo Pashkov, who studied this issue for many years.
Thank you. I would like to support this news conference on the part of the Public Council at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We are also involved in this as experts, and I believe that this is very relevant research, and the figures gives enough material for reaching opinions. I would like to cite Elmar Brok. He said 24 years ago that for the Kremlin it would be a catastrophe if the European project succeeds in Ukraine. And this is absolutely fair, and it would be very powerful signal for all other post-Soviet countries. We all remember very well that the Berlin Wall fall resulted in various geopolitical consequences. The two integration waves were those days. One was European and the other was Eurodesk, the modernized CIS wave. They became an influential geopolitical. They have not become the geopolitical subjects of power. Maybe it is for good. There are some events which I want to remind you about. They could be the cases to be included into the courses books for historians. In 2013, Mykola Azarov spoke about the European integration for Ukraine, that we need to move along the vector to Europe. Then there were two meetings of Yanukovych and Putin. After that, there were 15 billions of subsidies, and after that, at the Vilnius summit, we had the happening. We know what happened in Vilnius summit. So, on the one hand, it is very well seen that, and it is also supported by the results of our research. The main problem is seen in Ukrainian-Russian conflict. This is the attempts of Ukraine to leave the zone of Russia's interests, and the majority of population has been noting this for many years, and this is fair. Undoubtedly, and Russia wants not only to stop Ukraine's European integration, but there are many cases and researches by French and German institutes and the US research. The analysts say that de facto for Ukraine, Ukraine needs several things from the EU. Most of experts say that first, to give the perspective of membership, this would be a powerful impetus, and it is important. On the other hand, to some extent, I am not a supporter of Bernstein, but the European integration is the long process. It will not end with the association when Ukraine will become a member. Upon gaining the membership, there is a story for development. Ukraine's domestic policy is not completely compliant with the EU norms. What Ukraine can wait from the EU? I think we should, first of all, as a first task in our foreign policy, to gain solidarity and support from the European community in opposing the Russian Federation. We need Europe to maintain sanctions against Russia. And I think that the European integration today is the main instrument, the main tool of counteracting the Russian expansion, including integration with NATO. Mark Aurelius said that the best way to oppose your enemy is not to resemble this enemy, to be dissimilar. So being dissimilar, this is supported by the European integration. To my mind, as my colleague said, it is hard to forecast the European Union developments in future. For us, it is important to implement the norms, rules and standards of the EU in Ukraine. The second, dear colleagues, our government always report on the implementation of the association agreement, on the percentages, how much they have implemented and how much they have not. The key indicator should be the qualitative changes in various sectors of the economy, thanks to the implementation of the standards of the European Union and how this has influenced the social perception of citizens. On the one side, we have some achievements conducted during Petro Poroshenko's reign. For us, it is very important to continue movement along this path. We should continue the course of European integration. Now, do we have questions? No questions. There is a paradox. Paradoxical, it looks that the European integration will continue after the accession to the EU. The two countries which were the first at the end of 1980s in this European way, they were Hungary and Poland. Now they are inside the European Union and they are quite problematic. This is a paradox. I remember 1988, 1989, when there was solidarity and there were changes in Hungary, when Hungary opened the border with Austria, and all the world looked at Poland and Hungary, their politicians and intellectuals. But now the things are quite different in these countries. Now, please introduce yourselves. I think that we will have questions in the lounge. But I would like to ask journalists to say that this anniversary is important for Ukraine also, that this is our anniversary as well. Thank you.